All right, now we move to another major issue at this time, and that's happening at the United Arab Emirates, Dubai. I'm sure if you have been watching channels, you would see that our correspondent, our environment correspondent, Ayola Kasim, has been very busy. She was on the news at 10 last night, telling us some of the decisions that have been reached. We've seen announcements, and we've seen, about $1 billion have been set aside fund. But as she said in our observation in that report yesterday, how much of that has been accessed, especially by African countries who are most affected, by the activities of climate change, when we have the big industrialized countries, emitting some of those carbon dioxide. Well, to talk about this with us, we have someone who is right there in Dubai and has been attending some of those meetings. We have Irene David Arinze, is a climate finance expert. She's in Dubai. And also we have, not there physically, but very abreast with what's going on, Mr. Brent Barnett. He is in Brazil. He's the executive director at ETK Group. Both of them join us virtually for this conversation. That's Mr. Brent Barnett. Good morning, Mr. Brent.
Good morning.
I must say you're a very rich man. Brent is moving in leaps and bounds at this time, even though it's dropping. But good to have you on the show, Brent Barnett.
Thank you.
And then also we have Irene David Arinze is a climate finance expert. She's in Dubai and has been attending the meetings. Hi, Irene. Good morning.
Good morning, Ini. Nice to be on your program this morning.
Thank you. How's it been? How's it been attending the meetings, hearing all those big announcements and all of that? Sound impressive, but when you take some steps back and look at COP27 and all the funding that were promised, I guess it kind of reduces the excitement you have.
Yes, thank you so much once again for having me on your program. And rightly said, some things I think I should just put into perspective before I go straight into it. Nigeria is one of the 10 countries heavily hit by the impact of climate change. In Africa as a whole, Africa contributes barely 4% to global emissions. And during your introduction, like you also said, it's imperative for us to also note that the volume of financing coming into Africa, not to talk about the list of Nigeria, is very meager. There's a report by the IMF which showed that of the $35 billion currently sitting in the climate fund, only $3 billion has been able to be accessed by African countries, and that is very small compared to the impact of climate change that we're currently experiencing. However, if you have to start to put together in perspective the successes that we have recorded, for the first time ever, we saw that the purse for loss and damage is now being filled up a bit. We saw some commitments, pledges by the likes of the UAE. We saw pledges by Germany. So altogether, currently we have over $400 million put in the pause for loss and damage. But while we're excited about all of these developments, the question still remains, like you rightly said, what volume of this financing will come into Africa? But we also need to be ready. So that country readiness is very important. We need to be able to identify and earmark relevant projects, because we are experiencing heavy rainfalls, high sea rising sea levels. We saw what the flooding across Nigeria late last year, displacing people from their homes. It was definitely not, it wasn't, a very exciting sight. But these are things that, this is proof once again that we need this financing coming into Africa. We need this financing coming into Nigeria, but we must be ready. It was also exciting to see that, the president had rolled out the 100 electric vehicles that we should start to see around Nigeria. That, for one, is a step in the right direction. They have also, set up a committee led by the FIRS chairman and the head of the Director General of the NCCC, talking about now the task force for carbon markets, which stands at it's about a $2.5 billion market for us. If we are able to tap into that as Nigeria, as Africa, then definitely it's one that would be laudable for us.
Yeah, Irene, so you've talked about readiness, country readiness, like you mentioned it like how many times. What does that look like for a country like Nigeria?
Honestly, based on the meetings that I attended, I did attend a couple meetings where the president spoke at, and I was excited to see the likes of Alhaji Dangote, the likes of Alhaji Rabiu of BUA Cement as well. This is also to show that the billionaires, the ones that have got the chunk of the money that we are, when you talk about industrialization, these are the names that you hear. We see for them to be in those rooms, to pay rapt attention, and to also, have conversations with the president. It does show that they are thinking of solutions, thinking of ways in which we can tap into, this funding that is available for the country. And at the end of the day, it's going to then trickle down to those at the lower end of the pyramid. In terms of country readiness, I would say that these initiatives that both the government and, interestingly, even the private sector, I had seen in the Nigerian pavilion 2 days ago, where some MOUs were signed. Right. And I'm also seeing that even state governments are taking up the responsibility, coming up with initiatives themselves. So they are not just leaving everything in the hands of the federal government, but state governments are also now taking up that responsibility to say, this is what our government, this is what our states can offer you. Come and invest in us, and you would have your return on investment. And I would really say that for me was a very good one.
All right, Irene, let me go to Brent now and ask. Brent, Irene has mentioned state governments, mentioned big companies. What about the MSMEs? Because in a country like Nigeria, they make up more than 90% of companies in existence and providing employment. Do you see them as being captured in conversations at this COP28?
Well, first of all, let me say that I think it's very important that MSMEs figure prominently in the discussion. ETK spends most of our time working with MSMEs, so the work that we do is really focused on helping them, as Irene was just saying, to be ready to receive investment for the green transition. I'd also like to pick up on something that Irene said, and that is that climate change really is here already. We talk about making investments to try and ward off the worst impacts of climate change, but climate change is already happening. 6 of the worst climate-related incidents in the past 100 years have happened in the past 2 years. So Africa has been quite significantly impacted. So investment in the green transition is really essential, and MSMEs need to be thinking about that now. When we advise small businesses, really what we help them to think about is their risk exposure. If you're an agribusiness, for instance, and you're reliant on particular agricultural inputs, are those agricultural inputs likely to be impacted by increased flooding or by drought? If you're a manufacturer and you're dependent on, for instance, water in your facility, are you likely to be negatively impacted by reductions in available water? So if you look at your supply chain, if you look at the inputs to your business, how are you likely to be impacted by what's happening in the climate? So in an order for a business to really grow, we look at a couple of things. We look at the organizational capacity of the business. Going back to the topic of being ready to receive investment, do you have the strength as an organization to receive investment, to deploy it effectively so that you can manage your climate-related risk? That's one part of it. The other part of it as a small business is to think about your disclosure, because increasingly, if you want to access capital, if you want to borrow from a bank, if you want to receive a grant from a multilateral organization or receive investment from abroad, you need to be transparent about your sustainability journey. Do you have a strategy in place? Have you thought about your risk exposure? Do you think about other aspects of the way that you impact the community where you operate? So these are really the things that we work with businesses to advise them on, is to think about your risk exposure, to make sure that you're investment ready, that you have the capability to receive, and then to focus on what you need to be doing to address your likely climate risk.
And now, from Nigeria, we saw President Buhari, beg your pardon, President Bola Tinubu now has created a team that's supposed to carry out the Nigeria Carbon Market Activation Plan. Sounds like a lot of words put together. What do you see this team doing if they have to be effective?
Well, carbon credits are an interesting tool. Used properly, they can help fund the transition to a sustainable future, a more sustainable future. Used improperly, it can become a bit of a shell game where carbon emissions are moved from one party to another. So if they're used properly, they can help ratchet down emissions by companies that have maybe some baked-in emissions that are very difficult or expensive to ameliorate. You can buy carbon credits while you make the investment in more sustainable futures. Think about a manufacturing facility that uses coal for power. Perhaps what you want to do over time is you want to replace the coal burning capabilities with solar. You want to put a large solar farm to power your facility. Well, that takes time. So in the interim, you can buy carbon credits. Now, carbon credits really play there's sort of two perspectives in Nigeria. One is businesses probably want to buy carbon credits because they need to transition to more sustainable sources of energy. But Nigeria also stands to potentially benefit substantially by selling carbon credits. So Nigeria has significant agricultural forestry resources that can be used to generate revenue by selling carbon credits. Now, again, it's important to think about these as being high quality carbon credits, because carbon credits really come from one of two things, either from reduction in what would otherwise be emitted into the atmosphere, or by sequestering carbon. So you can think about protecting a forest, or you can think about planting a tree. Both of these things can be sources for generating carbon credits, but the important thing is that the carbon needs to remain sequestered and not then released into the atmosphere at some point in the future. So for carbon credits really to be effective, they need to be high quality, which means that it can be measured, the carbon remains sequestered, and it actually results in reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. That's really the key thing to think about. So it's a great thing that Nigeria is really at the forefront of trying to leverage carbon credits as a mechanism for transitioning to a green future, but it's very important that they be handled in the right way.
Yeah, Irene, I'd like to come to you. A lot of carbon information coming from Brent there. But what we'll ask is, or does it look like the Nigerian populace is educated enough to participate in this carbon credit sales or purchase enough to help this team that President Tinubu has activated, the Nigeria Carbon Market Activation Plan? Does it look like we are ready for that as individuals, as Nigerians?
Oh, of course, there needs to be a lot more trainings. There needs to be a lot more education. We need to talk more about these things. For some people, we need to be able to simplify it, because when it comes to climate financing, carbon markets, to be very honest, there are a couple of things which one would say, oh, this is jargon. What are they talking about? But the honest truth is, if we're able to break it down for them, because, for example, whether we like it or not, even the MSMEs are involved. They must get involved in it. They must understand it. And I'll give you an example. I was at a panel session where Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the WTO president, spoke yesterday. And one of the major challenges that we currently have globally, and of which MSMEs are also impacted by it, for example, is the issue about decarbonization standards. Currently, we have 73 fragmented carbonization standards across different countries, right? And this alone would impact on MSMEs, would impact on small businesses, whether we like it or not. Why? For example, I was reading the sustainability reports by Access Bank a while ago, and one of the things that I keep seeing recurring in these reports that I'm seeing from different financial institutions are, you are looking for funding as a small business or as a medium-sized business or as a big business. We want to know the impact of this your business on the environment. We want to know what kind of impact, what level of emission is going to, putting out in the atmosphere. How are you contributing to either the fight against climate change or helping to sustain the environment? We want to see your ESG practices. Do you have your reports already? These are some things they're asking you. Oh, if you're going to deploy this project in this location, what would be the emission at the end of the day? What would be the impact on the environment? So all these questions they are beginning to ask. And so small businesses, individuals, if you know you want to go into business, it's critical that you understand and learn. We're not saying you should then become an expert, but the basics of it. However, Dr. Ngozi mentioned something yesterday, which she also said that was accepted by everyone who, was on board when she talked about it, which was the issue of consolidation. All the international organizations, the likes of the World Bank, WTO, OECD, they need to start to speak the same language so that we have a consolidated carbon taxation, carbon pricing, harmonize the system, harmonize the rules such that every other person takes into consideration whatever rules that they come up with before they start to implement. So even if we now have a steering committee for Nigeria's carbon market, they are not going to work in isolation. They have to work in tandem with the international organizations, which perhaps I'm sure they perhaps are already in conversations with them already. But more communication, more information, more education needs to go into the general public's portfolio, so that they understand what we are trying to achieve really. Brent had mentioned ways in which you can trade this, your carbon markets can come in. We have, for example, in Congo, we have Congo Basin. That becomes a carbon sink. The whole idea is, for example, we have certain game reserves across Nigeria. Are we saying that, this can become our own carbon sink? So if we're selling this carbon credits for the large polluters, we are saying, while you are doing this, come and buy our carbon credits from us. We'll keep planting trees, preserving these particular locations. We have other African countries that are really doing this with different aspects of. You just find out what your competitive advantage is in the market. We have the likes of Seychelles, we have the likes of Gabon. They've moved ways in which they are even reducing their debt, for example, through the debt for nature swap. So you see that these things, they are really segmented, but I really would say that people need to take this seriously. Personally have an interest in learning about carbon markets, learning about climate financing. And you'll be good.
All right.
And get more financing.
Yes.
One day.
Yeah, well, I guess we could also sell our carbon for FX, Irene. But thank you so much. And we wish you the best in the rest of the meeting. Irene David Arinze, climate finance expert. We also have who contributed to this conversation, Brent Barnett, Executive Director at ETK Group. Thank you so much for your contribution. Brent, I'd like to be your friend. Brent's crude is an important commodity. Well, thank you so much for your perspective on the program.
Thank you.
All right, let's take a break now. When we come back, it will be commodities time.